I used to believe that silence was proof of peace. Our house was quiet in the evenings, the kind of quiet that suggested stability, routine, and comfort. Emily and I had been married long enough to mistake familiarity for intimacy. We moved through our days efficiently, like people who knew each other's schedules better than their thoughts. I told myself that this was what long marriages looked like. Ryan arrived in early autumn, carrying a single suitcase and the uncertainty of a young man who had reached adulthood without finding direction. He was my sister's son, 25 years old, polite, soft spoken, and visibly tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I offered him the spare room without hesitation. Family helped family. That belief had guided most of my life. Emily was the one who welcomed him most warmly. She stocked the fridge with his favorite foods, asked about his plans, listened when he spoke about feeling lost after graduation. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. Emily had always been kind. That was one of the reasons I fell in love with her. At first, the changes were small. Emily stayed up later. Ryan lingered in the living room after dinner instead of retreating to his room. Their conversations carried on long after I went to bed, low voices drifting through the hallway. When I passed by, they would pause, then smile as if nothing unusual had happened. I told myself they were just talking, that I was imagining distance because work had exhausted me. But distance has a way of announcing itself, even when no one names it. Emily stopped asking about my day. She seemed distracted, her attention often fixed on her phone or on thoughts she didn't share. When I reached for her at night, she was already asleep or claimed she was too tired to talk. I didn't push. I thought patience was love. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed more present each day. He helped Emily cook, asked her advice, laughed at things I barely noticed. Sometimes I would enter a room and sense that I had interrupted something meaningful. They would separate slightly, not enough to look guilty, just enough to feel aware of themselves. I ignored the feeling that settled in my chest because it felt disloyal to doubt the people I cared about. The night everything shifted was unremarkable in every other way. It had rained earlier, leaving the air cool and heavy. Emily went to bed before me, saying she had a headache. I stayed up finishing work emails, trying to be productive instead of lonely. When I finally turned off the lights and headed down the hall, I noticed a soft glow coming from the living room. I assumed Ryan had fallen asleep with the television on. It wouldn't have been the first time. I walked closer, already planning to remind him about the electricity bill, when I heard Emily's voice. It was quieter than usual, careful, like someone speaking from a place of vulnerability. I stopped without meaning to. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, but closer than they needed to be. Emily's posture was open, turned toward him. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression raw and exposed. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to understand the tone. This wasn't casual conversation. This was confession. Ryan spoke about feeling like a disappointment, about not knowing who he was supposed to become. Emily listened with an intensity one hadn't felt directed at me in months. She nodded, offered reassurance, told him that being lost didn't mean being broken. Her voice was gentle, almost intimate, as if the rest of the world had narrowed to the space between them. I stood there longer than I should have. They didn't touch, not really, but the closeness between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Emily reached out briefly, resting her hand on Ryan's arm in a way that was meant to comfort, yet lingered just a moment too long. Ryan didn't pull away in that instant. I understood that boundaries don't always collapse loudly. Sometimes they erode quietly, disguised as concern, as empathy, as kindness taken one step too far that I stepped back before they noticed me. I didn't know what I would have said if they had. I returned to the bedroom and lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the sound of their voices continued, muted by distance but loud in my thoughts. Emily came to bed later, moving carefully as if she didn't want to wake me. I kept my eyes closed, unsure whether I was pretending to sleep or pretending nothing had changed. Lying there, I realized that the trust one had taken for granted now carried a fracture. It wasn't broken yet, but it was no longer whole. I didn't know what this meant for my marriage or for my family, only that something essential had shifted. And once a truth begins to surface, no amount of silence can push it back down.
The room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if sound itself had been instructed to stay away. Rachel Harper lay on the bed, one arm resting at an unnatural angle, her dark hair fanned across the pillow. The curtains were half drawn, allowing a dull strip of daylight to fall across her face. To Ethan Caldwell, the sight was both intimate and unbearable. This was not how he had imagined seeing her again, not framed by sheets and stillness, not with a child waiting behind him for answers. He crossed the room in careful steps, listening for any sign of breath. When he placed his fingers at Rachel's wrist, he felt a pulse, faint but present. Relief rushed through him, sharp and disorienting. He straightened, turning to Lily, who stood rigid in the doorway. "She's alive," he said gently. "We need to take her to a hospital." Lily nodded, absorbing the words with the solemnity of someone used to receiving instructions rather than comfort. Ethan moved quickly then, calling for emergency services, giving details in the calm, precise tone he used in crises. Yet beneath the composure, his thoughts were unraveling. Every glance at Rachel's face reopened a chapter he had sworn was closed. At the hospital, fluorescent lights erased all sense of time. Rachel was taken from them, the bed rolling away with efficient urgency. Lily clung to Ethan's sleeve, her small fingers curled tightly into the fabric of his jacket. He did not pull away. He could not. In the waiting area, he sat beside her, the space between them shrinking into something unavoidably intimate. "She works too much," Lily said after a long silence. "My mom. She says she has to." Ethan swallowed. He imagined Rachel juggling shifts, worrying over bills, choosing between rest and responsibility. He had sent money when he remembered, convinced that financial support absolved him of deeper involvement. Hearing Lily's matter-of-fact explanation stripped that illusion bare. "What does she do?" he asked. "She cleans offices at night," Lily replied. "And sometimes she gets tired in the morning, but she still makes breakfast." The image cut deeper than accusation. Ethan looked at Lily and saw traces of Rachel, the curve of the mouth, the determined set of the jaw. Recognition pressed in, undeniable now. He wondered how many mornings Rachel had pushed through exhaustion, refusing to ask for help from a man who had already made his choice. The doctor approached, her expression composed but serious. "I'm Dr. Susan Miller," she said. "Rachel Harper is stable for now, but she collapsed from severe exhaustion and dehydration. We're running tests." "Can I see her?" Ethan asked. "Doctor." Miller's gaze shifted briefly to Lily. "She'll be able to see her soon," she said. "But she needs rest." They waited again, time stretching thin. Ethan's phone vibrated, relentless. Claire Caldwell's name appeared on the screen. He silenced it without answering, a small act of defiance that felt strangely overdue. Mark Reynolds followed soon after, his message brief and concerned. Ethan ignored that too. The world he had built was knocking, but he could not step back into it yet. When they were allowed into Rachel's room, she looked smaller, diminished by tubes and monitors. Lily approached first, placing her hand carefully over her mother's. Ethan hung back, unsure of his place. He watched Rachel's chest rise and fall, each breath a quiet negotiation. "She promised we'd see the ocean," Lily whispered. "She said she just needed one more week." Ethan closed his eyes, guilt pressing in until it was almost physical. He remembered Rachel telling him, years ago, that she didn't need grand gestures, just consistency, just truth. He had offered neither. His marriage to Claire had been a fortress he hid behind, built of status and expectation. The affair had been a fracture in that structure, one he had sealed over instead of repairing. Rachel stirred slightly, her brow creasing as if she sensed the presence in the room. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on Lily. A faint smile touched her lips. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured. Relief washed over Lily, immediate and unfiltered. "You woke up," she said, tears spilling freely now. "I told him you would." Rachel's gaze shifted, confusion giving way to recognition. Her eyes found Ethan, and whatever warmth had surfaced vanished. She looked away, the small movement heavy with meaning. "Why are you here?" Rachel asked, her voice hoarse. Ethan stepped forward despite himself. Lily came to me for help, he said. You collapsed. I brought her here. Rachel closed her eyes, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, her expression was composed, almost detached. Of course you did, she said quietly. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a tired acceptance that stung more than anger would have. Doctor Miller re-entered, checking monitors, speaking in measured reassurances. She instructed Rachel to rest, to avoid stress. The word lingered in the air, absurd in its simplicity. Stress had been the fabric of Rachel's life for years, woven from responsibility and abandonment. As they left the room, Lily reluctant but obedient, Ethan felt the weight of an unspoken truth settle between them. Rachel had not asked him to stay. She had not asked him to leave. The distance was deliberate, a boundary drawn from experience. In the corridor, Ethan finally answered his phone. Claire's voice was clipped, impatient. Where are you? She demanded. I'm at a hospital, Ethan said. Something important has come up. There was a pause, sharp and disbelieving. More important than your own life? She asked. Ethan looked through the glass at Rachel lying still, Lily seated beside her bed. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the certainty of it. He ended the call before Claire could respond. The choice felt irreversible, and for the first time, he did not try to soften it. As he returned to the room, Ethan understood that whatever happened next would not be managed or contained. The truth he had avoided was awake now, breathing, waiting.